Okay, namaste to everybody. Welcome to this episode of Dialogues in Dharma with Dharmic Shakti. Today, I am joined by two very highly respected people who are great to talk to. I would like to introduce Dr. Sankaran and Pratap Hegde ji. So Dr. Sankaran is an academician who has taught in various institutes like TAPMI, SP Jain, and he recently retired from K Hegde Institute of Management. But he's very actively involved in continuing to research new areas in organizational behavior and management. So I'm really happy to have Dr. Sankaran. Pratap Hegde ji is what we call a serial entrepreneur. He has started multi-organizations. And he says some failure, some success, but at heart he likes to be described as a farmer. He has a very wonderful place called Avni Orchards, which is it's just teeming with life and nature, and a lot to learn from him on on basically the whole concept of practice, which he teaches also in many of the B schools. So thank you, Pratap ji and Sankaran ji. So just for our viewers today, what we want to talk about is the whole concept of how do we relook at organizations, right? From a very shareholder-driven model, or to some extent shareholder plus employee-driven model. How do we move from such organizations to what I call conscious organizations, right? So Sankaran ji, if you could share some light on this concept.
All right. Good morning, Vanaja ji and Pratap ji. Very happy to be here with you. It's a lovely morning today. It's not too warm, nor is it too wet.
Yes.
Well, actually, I would like to just say, what is consciousness when we talk about organization first?
Yes.
Because let's get that clarified so that we have a way to move forward. Consciousness essentially means knowing how to act in a situation where one is able to further one's objective, which for natural beings is first survive. So at a very, very basic level, at the level of animals, consciousness, very quickly I'll state this because I think we need to get this out. At the basic level of animals, it's about stimulus response reactions, right? So we'll say this dog is conscious because it jumps to food when it is hungry, for instance. Yeah. So this is coded in their DNA or in their body. It's an embodied experience, actually, as they call it. At the next level, at the human level, where we actually are different from animals, is not different in a superior sense, but that's how we have been made by God, if you may. It's about knowing that I know. It's important to know that I know. Even today, human beings are suffering from this lack of knowledge that I have it in me to do things, and that's why we actually follow the gang, the rabble, which can be extremely violent and worse than animals, as we have seen and we see even today in 21st century. So to know that we know is very important, and it's not. I'm not saying that from a position of entirely knowing. Also, it's a process. So knowing to know is very important. Now, it has been noticed that when people come together, there are lots of advantages and disadvantages. The advantages are we are able to do things which alone we cannot do. That's why we have organization. We have very large organization. Some people say organization started with religion. Some others say it started with the military. But modern industrial organization started with the East India Company, especially with the limited liability idea. So organization is nothing but a group of people outside the family, outside the immediate community, which actually formally defines what the roles are. In a family, it's not really formally defined. The norms are, they emerge, what the mother does, what the son does after a certain age, what, the daughters do after a certain age, for instance, meaning they start earning children, and the older parents could possibly become dependent on them, at least physically, if not financially, and so on. So those norms are not defined, but they emerge. But in a formal organization, or organization for that matter, these are formally decided. And usually there is exit and entry very clearly defined, so to say. So this way we can define organizations also. So consciousness is nothing but this movement towards greater understanding in some ways about the self, though formal organizational theory doesn't talk about self-knowledge. It's about knowing to know. So now if we reach that stage of knowing, the next step is really, it's about dropping the mind itself, because knowing to know is a mind stuff. It's about the mind, the brain. It's a logical thing largely. Of course, the heart also is there. Emotions do get involved. But then at that stage, the mind itself gets dropped, and we are talking about a new era where intuition takes over. But that's a very, very early, extremely early stages of human development. And some people, more evolved people, I would say, that's what I see. And I'm not saying it from the sense of, elitism or anything. It can happen to anybody, anytime. It has nothing to do with even education, or possibly it has more to do with experience. We go through difficult phases, and then we start understanding how these intuitions play, for instance. So that is consciousness. So now the question is, how do we use this anthropomorphic term of consciousness for organizations? For organizations, consciousness is really about, according to my understanding, it's a process, number one. Second thing is, more and more people becoming free in doing what they want to do, and yet contributing maximum to the organization. It's really about a balance at a higher level, so to say. Conscious organizations are really about people knowing what exactly is to be done, where, what, in what context, and being really, really on the ball, so to say, at all times, and being extremely, extremely practical because of this self-knowledge. So that's a conscious organization, where more people have that kind of understanding. And if they are not fitting with the organization, they live on their own, or they'll be, of course, there could be, all kinds of ramifications. It could also mean somebody telling the person gently that, okay, this is probably not the place for you, and being in a mentorship mode and getting the person, not be a burden for the organization. That also is there. So it's a very complex idea, and it's a movement towards greater consciousness, both as individuals and also individuals in roles in the organization.
So that's very interesting, which you mentioned. Conscious organization is one that where people do what they want to do, at the same time contribute to the larger scope of things, right? Because usually this is where you see the role conflict coming in. So where people each pull in different directions. So from a stakeholder, we've explored, many of the organization behavior theories are there, which talk about stakeholders and things like that. But how is a conscious organization different from the standard stakeholder model of organizations? And what are some of those elements that need to be there for an organization to function as a conscious organization?
Yeah, that's a very, very interesting question. I think I've been looking at some of these organizations that are successful. I also ran a company for about 8 months between my stints between the industry and a full-time academic. So I've kind of looked at some of these things, and I realized that a conscious organization, you said multi-stakeholder, did you say that?
Yes. So organizations have multi-stakeholders, right? Like today, correct. You have so many even lobbies getting involved in organizations.
So it's a question of between practice and between this idea of a conscious organization, we need to have something which will really tell us what should we really be doing eventually to create such organizations. So I would discuss that. right? In terms of maybe structure, design, etc. The usual parameters that are available to us as organizational creators, organizational designers, organizational uh, organizational drivers, the persons who really actually drive organizations, essentially top management. I think where the change has to come is we have to drop certain ideas of absolute management principles. What I mean by that is we need to be much more contextual. So consciousness is something that we apply to a context. For instance, I'm going to challenge something that is very, very fundamental to management, leading from the front. Now, leading from the front applies, for instance, on occasions when there is danger. Now, this stimulus response idea of learning or stimulus response idea of action is very reactive. And it is only when there is, something outside of oneself that one reacts to it. That is stimulus. Otherwise, one is happy. That is a very, very deterministic, as they say, a deterministic model. Outside determines what I'm going to do, for instance. Now, that needs to be changed. If people have to be really happy, there's something with bubbles within human beings. That's why human beings are different from animals. So we have to get out of this leading from the front to another way to say this would be leading the front in times of danger, but not always. For most knowledge organizations, leading from behind is more useful because you will give a long rope to people, but you'll have a lot of conversation about governance. Now we'll get into some related areas like regulation, governance, rules versus principles and so on. So a conscious organization would be one where the leader, the so-called leadership, in fact, the very leadership itself, the very word leader itself will start being questioned, actually, will be more situational. So maybe trusteeship, invisible leadership, servant leadership, leading from the front also, all these will have their relevance based on the context. That's number one. Second thing is structure will be probably more fluid. Not probably, it will be more fluid. So there will be situational awareness as to what can be done. So we will save a lot of time in terms of, making immediate decisions. We have seen this happening in some organizations. We don't have to look elsewhere. We just have to look at those outliers. But somehow statistics looks at, bell-shaped curves. It's fond of bell-shaped curves and the average. This whole average fetishness, if I may, comes from the feeling that, it's deterministic world out there. I mean, this is a philosophical idea, agency versus determinism. And I'm fond of dipping into these fundamentals, actually. So I don't want to dwell on this now. That's for another day. But then, so we need to look at outliers and see how people are being effective in what they have set out for themselves. So if a person is a sadhu, for instance, that's what the person has chosen. And if it's genuinely his choice, we must just appreciate that person, another person. But if somebody else wants, as the cliche goes, a Ferrari, so be it. That's, but you should realize that there are varieties of people and there is no one way to do this. And that will help us in organizations to actually place people better in terms of their own swadharma.
Yeah. Today, organizations, and especially management is so focused on control, right?
Exactly.
So the moment you say, let people do the way they would prefer to do it, it is the very antithesis of control.
Absolutely.
So how do you balance this as in?
I think we need to, we need to have new forms of leadership. For instance, we can only talk, we can talk in terms of examples. Examples don't prove anything, but it proves the potential. These outliers, if I may, earlier I said, in statistics, we talk about outliers. So we have a lot of organizations which have this self-organizing ability. That's where we can learn from nature. Nature is not homogeneous. In fact, anything that humanly conceived idea of homogeneity and efficiency eventually fails. We have seen this happen all the time. We are happening. So the idea of self-order, the idea of new forms of contextually relevant leadership. Then we will have ideas of circularity. I mean, we see this when some organizational decisions are made on maximization. If we are schooled in the right way, according to me, or at least if we have that inkling, we will know that this is going to hit us back. The causality thinking has to be actually replaced by circularity thinking. People have talked about since I'm partly academic, I'm happy I'm an academic now, last 20 years. I've really, really looked at some of these thoughts. Some of these lovely thoughts have been articulated. Some of them have been implemented also. For instance, learning organizations. Peter Senge's learning organization talks about circularity. So after we get schooled in kind of thinking, it's not about cognitive learning alone. It's about, deeply getting embedded in one's consciousness. Then we start seeing how actually this particular action is going to recoil and hit one back. We see this in politics all the time. But we stick to this causality principle. That doesn't mean that causality principle is not important. It's important to know that if I have to go to Bangalore, I have to go in a certain direction. If I have to fly to Bangalore, I can possibly go straight there through the air, but then I should know which direction I should go. So, cause and effects have to be understood, but there is something more than that. There's a cause and effect across time, temporal elements, spatial elements. What are the, negatives? What are the resistance we are actually setting up? All those things will start hitting us when we think in terms of circular reasoning. And our sense of time will be different then. So there's a training required. So to answer your question, how can we change? So I think training is fundamental. I'm saying this, from the academic point of view. And practitioners, we must have more people like Pratap who do things differently and come into the fore and talk to youngsters and say how, these kind of Senge kind of ideas complement his own actions, for instance. So we need to marry these differing ideas, these opposing forces, because right now the entire thing is binary. Yeah, that is another fundamental thing.
Let me ask learning. A very basic question, right?
Yeah.
Why do we even need a conscious organization? So if we have to give so much training and it will take a lot of mind shift changes, obviously it's not something that can easily happen. Why do we even need something like that?
Actually, 25%. I mean, just to give a number, 25% of the people in the world should be actually worried about how people think. 25% of the people should be really worried about how we can use power responsibly, because we are all working very hard now. I think we should not be working so hard because we are actually creating and destroying at a very macro level. There is so much premium on destroying without knowing that we are destroying. I mean, I can go into this, military expenditure or not. Let's not get into those macro things. But at a very individual level, a lot of time people are suffering. Why should we suffer? We should be happy. So we should really be working on things which we really enjoy. Artistic expression. People are willing to work for 20 hours if they're working on things of their liking. But there's so much strife in the world, and we are finally going to, I don't know where we are heading for ourselves. But crystal gracers say that we are not going the right way. So I think part of that is the successful, the business model. Organizations are very successful. We must realize that. But when there is success, when we try to overdo those things. So that point has come right now, because business organizations have been extremely successful. They are even challenging, sovereign states. You can see the discussion today between PM, the new PM, Kier, and Elon Musk, for instance. So organizations are becoming extremely powerful. So we have to use that power responsibly. So it's very important for this huge number of people who are teaching, who are thinking through things, to actually spend time so that we are more efficient, we are more effective, we are more, in line with others are doing, so that there is more efficiency.
Thank you, Shankaranji. And I think from a theoretical perspective, you've given us a context I wanted to put some questions across to Pratap ji now.
Very nice. I'm
So,
looking for.
as you have been involved in many organizations which have multiple stakeholders, and where some aspects of this whole conscious organization principles have been embodied. So could you tell us, sir, about how do you see this? What is your understanding about building organizations with multiple stakeholders?
Yeah, there are two kinds of multi-stakeholder platform organization. One, particularly you see them more and more. They are funded by VCs. They are basically a capitalistic multi-stakeholder platform. That is one side. Although they are multi-stakeholder and driven digitally, the fundamentals have not changed. Basically, the whole benefit sharing is not there. Benefit is only shared between investors, shareholders, and maybe employees. Nothing much goes to the other stakeholders. Rather, the trend has been that many other stakeholders who also contribute a lot, they are being even exploited. Okay. Now, this is a tragedy. Although today's situation, where we are in a point where many things are converging, the technology, the wireless internet, the smartphones, all these technologies and the business models, and we are in a very connected society, connected world. In this situation, every business need to go perhaps multi-stakeholder. It is not possible to organize something in a very linear way, because that is what the change which has happened, because we are in a very connected world. Now, many of these organizations are multi-stakeholder, they are platform businesses, but they are driven by capitalistic approaches, and there is no change in the capitalism there. But there is the same time, there are other set of organizations who are multi-stakeholder, co-ops, or the platform co-ops. These platform co-ops bring a new change, very refreshing change. Here, the possibility of distribution of the benefits, and everybody contributes. It's a community model. And it is not something very new. Today, it is possible to do it or build it and run it with the integration of the digitalization or the technology. If you go back in the history, our villages, particularly in countries like India, were exactly operating like that. The only binding thing in a village was geography. All the people in a given village, maybe that village is bound by a river or a forest or a mountain or something, but all the people bound within this geographical features. And also you could see this trend or this kind of models among certain business communities. There, the binding force was the blood. Okay, all people belonging to certain community, they come together and work together. Even today, that continues, that kind of models, and very, very successfully such models have grown. And today there is a great possibility, because thanks to digitalization of the society, people can be, people having some common interest. They need not be bound by any kind of geography. They could be anywhere in the world, but they have some common interest. They have some common challenges. They have common requirements. They can come together. They can be connected, thankfully. Instead of that geography or the blood connection, today we have digitally connected communities. So these are all the digital communities. It is possible to create digital communities, and around them it is possible to create such multi-stakeholder co-ops, because here the ownership is distributed, and also the benefits are distributed, and collectively they run this business activity, and each one contributes certain things, and everybody has common interests, and common challenges, and it works. Particularly my own experience of bringing together and working with certain farmer producer companies, it really works. As late as yesterday, we were in one farmer producer company which I'm involved with. We wanted to do some interventions at the farmer level, certain equipments and certain day-to-day equipments needed. And I realized when we have a discussion with various stakeholders, which include farmers, which include employees of the organization and many other people together, they could come out with beautiful requirements, how exactly that particular equipment should work on ground, and how it should be powered, whether the solar power will work there, and certain examples of certain farmers doing some innovations. Now, this kind of inputs never comes for the large organization, because they operate at 35,000 feet and they don't get these fundamentals right. And that's why and it's a reality, most of our farm equipments today are not even originated from Indian farming practices. It has been bought from some other country and they're trying to push it here. Now, a lot of such good ideas come in. So this is how such collaborative commerce can happen. Of course, there are challenges. I'm not saying that everything is so easy and with this we can do it. There are multiple challenges in conceptualizing, building, creating, scaling, and running such organizations successfully. But this is the way forward, because I don't think that we have seen the other kind of organizations. Certainly there is a great need, at least for the certain sectors, like in the bottom of the pyramidal rural sectors, or even in the urban areas, many sectors. There is a need to create such platforms which are basically digitally driven but run by the stakeholders.
So could you share the two things which came out, which I wanted to explore further, is that one is that they need to basically, these organizations are created around shared goals. And when people with shared goals come together, then they are able to bring in their own perspective and do their own contribution, and the solutions become far more evolved. What are some kind of sectors where you think such organizations work better than the traditional models? You mentioned urban and rural. If you can just elaborate, maybe some of the examples which you have personally worked with.
Yeah, see, it's a continuously evolving. This is being tried out in various sectors. Internationally, if you say, there is something called Stocksy. This Stocksy is nothing but a community of photographers. They take pictures, and all pictures are they do this one common platform. Everything is available and it is marketed jointly digitally, and people get the share out. Everybody gets something out of it. So there is something called Fairbnb, which is nothing but such collaboration of various homestays and hotels or small hotels, etc. They come together and create their own platforms. These are all the some services industry mostly. I think the more and more in the services industry, there is a lot of scope, and it could be even a global. Every organization can be global today, thanks to the technology in that sense, particularly in the services. So from day one, they are global organizations. So coming to our own backyard, I think one of the great opportunity here, which is which could be explored, is in the rural sector, the farmer producer companies. The farmers, that's one major challenge in this country today. The huge number of people are depending on the farming, and that contributes maximum job opportunities. And I think it may be much more going forward when the artificial intelligence comes in. So now here there are many challenges for the complete farming or agro ecosystem. It is not just farming, it's also the processing, it is also the marketing. There is a lot of activities which need to be done here properly, and it can't be just left to the middlemen, who again do it at a very, very profit motives. And that is the reason our farm sector, rural sector is struggling today. Now, here is a great opportunity. There are large number of farmer producer companies have been created in this India. It is not that it has not been created. From last 10-15 years, the farmer producer company, that new Companies Act has given the necessary the framework for such organizations. But the problem is there are very few farmer producer companies who have been who could able to manage themselves well, because yes, they come together and government plays a role in facilitating and gives some money, but that is just inadequate. They need to be, there is requirement of a hand holding, there is a requirement of a incubation till a certain point, and they require a lot of inputs, whether it's a management input, financial inputs, innovations, and just to left to themselves, it is not possible. There are many such concepts which we are discussing today need to be implemented there. Okay, now that is where the problem is. Farmer producer companies are one great opportunity. I am personally involved with a few of them. So I think many problems which we are facing in the rural sector today can be resolved, can be managed well with this kind of setup, which couldn't be done in cooperatives. That's why I think a producer company concept is much better. Ultimately, the real issue there is the management. And of course, it should be done very, very consciously. That is where. And another area is in India, we are now, this producer company can also be created in the handicrafts. Like, in certain communities, there are some weavers communities, there are other communities, what they create locally. If a proper producer companies for this kind of products can be created and managed, and in such a model, we can also bring in very good amount of the technology. The whole market opens up. Today, e-commerce is a great opportunity for well-run producer companies to market their produce across the country. So the one major problem gets resolved with the integration of e-commerce. And of course, technology for engaging with all the stakeholders is a very, very important dimension, but it is possible today. Now everyone has a smartphone, every village has internet, so it is no more a problem. We are truly in a connected world, and it is possible to create such services or such platforms in many more sectors. Like taxi is another sector. Right now, the taxi aggregation is mostly by capitalistic platforms. They are also multi-stakeholder platform, but they don't work like a multi-stakeholder platforms. But the same platforms can be created at a district level, at a town level, because it is a huge scale is not required to make this viable. It's again a wrong notion, and again, aggregation need not be always revenue aggregation. Okay, now the capitalistic models of this kind of platforms are very much after the revenue aggregation. They collect the money. They can only facilitate the buyer with the seller. That's also a possibility. Service giver and service taker. So right now, many of the models which are there in the capitalistic platforms, even I agree that they're also multi-stakeholder, but they can also be recreated at a local level with the cooperative kind of models. Of course, there is a changes required in the Companies Act so that we can bring in producer companies to many more sectors. Today, that is the one limitation which India is facing when it comes to the local requirements.
So, sir, I'd like to break down some of these points which you mentioned, right? One is you said that you talked about a number of challenges, and in fact, you directly jumped into the solutions itself. So, if you could just take a step back and let's say, group of people want to come together and they want to build, let's say a farmer producer organization. And what are some of the initial challenges that they will face? Obviously, one of it would be technology know-how, right? Which they may not have. But what are some of the other challenges which you see? And you talked about management support, right? So what kind of support will they need? And where do you see this expertise coming in?
Yeah. This is very, very important question. Now, as on today, people who are coming together to create such an organization, itself there is a lack of clarity. Now, we have been discussing now about the whole conceptual clarity about such organizations. Now, that is missing. And people who create or even promote such organizations, they don't have the full picture. They don't have the conceptual clarity about how all these things can be done, why it is to be done. Also, there are, why they are doing it. Sometimes, many such things are happening just for the sake of statistics, or somebody wanted to, everybody, the whole idea of creating an organization will be to, it can quickly become exploitative.
Yeah.
Now, that level of evolution is needed. Those values, those purposes must be very clear. The people who come together and do it, if we go wrong at that level itself, the purpose for such an initiative, it's a very, very, it can take dangerous and bad turns tomorrow. So there itself, there is a lot of guidance needed, hand-holding needed. And challenges in terms of the management, like I will give the example of the farmer producer or handicrafts producer companies. See, the collective, the whole focus many times is only on the production, because they don't have the big picture. And this is where I think they need considerable hand-holding, training, etc. Question is who would do it. There are some efforts to do it, but it has not been successful so far in India. Many government-driven initiatives are not really delivering what they are supposed to deliver. After that, once they start operating, they need the financial management skills. They don't have. They don't understand the difference between P&L and cash flow. They are two different things. And they also need proper financial support. I was shocked when I realized some developmental organizations give them money, instead of giving the regular working capital, they give working capital term loan. So it is, this is a very, very wrong way of funding this kind of nascent organizations. So there is a continuous support needed in terms of the management, in terms of training, in terms of human resources management and organization development, and many more clarities about all these concepts. And if all these inputs are given, this kind of organizations can be sustainable. They can add huge positive value to the society, and that value is equitably distributed among the stakeholders. That is the beauty of it. Now, see, in a typical farmer producer company, now any farmer gets better realization for what he has grown, because there is no middleman in between. Now, middleman is removed. Middlemen generally take 40% of the the price which a consumer pays. Now, this is done. And there is also a very interesting possibility of giving back giving him back, the extra profits which producer company earns from the transaction by buying certain things from a farmer, that extra profit which he earns can be given back to the farmer. This kind of models are not there in any other, it's a very unique commercial model. So there is a lot of benefit to be earned by the farmer, a lot of interventions possible. We can provide him the technology and he becomes a part of the community. There's a lot of peer-to-peer learning happens. Then the whole community improves in its outlook, in its productivity. I think that is the way forward, which has never been possible in the so-called traditional models which we have been using so far. But I somehow feel that it was very much there when the villages were much more, cohesive. And it may be still there in certain dimensions in the villages, but this is one great hope for some of these sectors.
So maybe the skills or the skilled people who have this kind of level of ability to create such an organization, maybe they are no longer there with the farmer organizations and they have moved to corporates.
Yes.
Probably that could be a reason. So
that is a major reason. Yeah.
I'm curious, like, is there like a governing body, or, is the need of the hour something like a think tank, or I wouldn't even call it a think tank, like an operational excellence
Center of excellence.
a center of excellence kind of
a
model where all of these FPOs can plug into.
Great.
Has that been, has that been tried out? And
in India, actually, India has been a pioneer in this particular model, but unfortunately, it has been tried out at a government level. Okay, which has not worked, very honestly. And center of excellence is a great idea. There is a need, which I should also say that I'm also working on such a possibility with certain organizations. Can we create an aggregation of producer companies, particularly farmer producer companies, to begin with at least, and create an ecosystem of farmer producer companies, so that this center of excellence can bridge these gaps, the management gaps, the guidance, hand-holding, training, organization development, technology. So there is no point in, one can replicate the technology rather than each one developing certain things.
Correct.
Like, there is a great opportunity in the export markets, but individual companies are small. They can't manage. Somebody else has to manage this kind of challenges because risks are more. See, another challenge which I forgot to talk about. See, in a farmer, it's being a collective, the biggest challenge is the risk management. Who will take the risk? In a typically, capitalistic organizations, the promoters or investor take the risk. And they can take certain initiative, taking that risk, knowing very well that they could lose out. In this case, there is hardly any risk capital available, and we can't take a risk. So in the process, these small organizations become very risk averse, and it is very essential also to an extent. So somebody else has to do that. Some specialized units which can take up the riskier part of the game. So that is also needed, but it is a great thought, and it is very essential to create such kind of a center of excellence which can help a larger number of FPOs. That is very, very essential in my opinion.
No, that's good, and probably we should have a deeper conversation on this, right?
Sure,
what should such a center of excellence do for FPOs?
Correct.
But I want to come back to the whole concept of conscious organizations, because that's really where we started, and we looked at FPOs as an example of conscious organizations which have their own challenges, largely around the whole whys of it. Why do they come together? And technology being there, but how does it get implemented? How do you lower the costs? And how do you bring the management know-how? And how do you handle the risks, right? So these are some of the issues. So from your perspective, because we are, the whole idea is we're trying to explore how concepts of Dharma, right, can actually help organizations get better, and how Dharma can be, very important pillar in creating these kind of conscious organizations which are running at a higher potential. Because very clearly, we have a landscape which is very, we had these models in the past, like you mentioned, in the villages. They were successful for many thousands of years. The context has changed, the people's mindsets have changed, and therefore, these models, they're kind of going against the current. So what are some of the factors that need to be there, and how would you relate it to dharmic concepts?
See, basically, what is dharma? Dharma is all about inclusion. Dharma is all about wholeness. Dharma is all about equity. Dharma is all about fairness. And Dharma is not religion. Actually, I don't think that any of the religions really follow Dharma. So actually the model is there in the nature. The nature operates in a very, very dharmic way. And this whole concept needs to be learned experientially, because it can't be learned, in my opinion, it can't be learned through books or anything. And it is beyond knowledge, as Professor Sankaran talked about. And one need to transcend the mind to get this. One can't really understand this. So once the insights come in, because I have seen it, it is a very common thing in the villages. The people who are less educated, they are much more conscious. The consciousness has got degraded perhaps to a great extent by urbanization and education, etc. Because people who are much more closely interacting with the nature, who live in the midst of the nature, they are naturally conscious. And it is, to that extent, it is easier. But unfortunately, they don't know that they are suffering from lack of that clarity. Now they think that people who are having hugely educated, living in the urban centers, are much superior for them. This is the problem. I think that if you give some clarity, they will come up. Actually, particularly, I feel there is a huge potential for such people, the rural people who are working more with the nature, who are less educated, because once the artificial intelligence comes in, many of these the advantages the other side has will go away. And these people have huge, because I have always seen people in the villages are much more creative. We can call it as a jugaad, but they are creative. They do something. They put certain pieces together and create something else. I have run companies, but the difference is, if I give some work to these people in the village, they will not say that I don't have that, I don't have this resource. They will put some pieces together and make a solution happen. This kind of innovation I have not seen in the urban center. So if you ask me, they're actually ready. They are more conscious, particularly in the rural sector, for this kind of organization. They're naturally conscious. Coming back to the Dharma, because they're conscious, they understand this equity, and because there is no greed driving this here. I think they are much more because of their whole setting and their background and their less education, really helps them to align to this conscious, building a conscious organization. But whoever tries to guide this or build this must be consciously do it. Then only it happens. Because if you take this very so-called modern management concepts blindly into that, is not going to work. So there is a lot of respect need to be given to them, and a lot of listening is needed. Because when you listen, when you encourage them, a lot of ideas, a lot of innovation comes out. And they're very much aligned to very dharmic approach to the business, because there is a less greed, there is a very much alignment with the nature, and that's what is dharma. When you align to the nature and do how nature does, you are in the dharmic path. I don't think that any books, any scripture is an alternative to that.
True. So if you could just help, because you've seen so many such organizations, you've seen successful ones and ones that have not been so
Failed
successful,
ones as well.
failed ones. Can you give us an example of a successful organization, like which has embodied some of these principles, and what, according to you, made them successful? I think that will help people kind of understand this concept a little bit better.
I know, but it may be an entire discussion may be required to dwell very deep onto one organization. But I can certainly talk about one farmer producer organization which I am associated very closely. That is a farmer producer organization of producers of organic products. They are organic farmers. Around 1,200 farmers have come together. Maybe around 50% of them are active. It is called Sahaja Organics. And this organization is 15-year-old. This year it must be around 30 crore organization. And it is certainly one of the, of course, they have won so many national awards. And I'm also a founder member of this organization, and I'm also associated in the management of this organization. My own observation is one of the fundamental reasons why it is successful is very clear from those people, who are in the helm of the affairs, the board of directors, the chairperson, the CEO. These people have that clarity. I know they are not driven by the greed. They have that. Their vision is very clear, their values are very clear. And that flows down to the employees. That is, regularly shared with other stakeholders, not only farmers on the other side, the customers on the other side. There are so many other stakeholders who are working together to make this organization tick and successful. And if you ask me, one of the basic reason for this, the fundamental reason why they are successful is clarity about the values, vision, and mission. Very, very clear. So idea is not someone wants to make money here, how much more profit, how much rich I will become. That kind of typical thought process is not there. And second reason is I think they have put together some right people in actual executions. Again, flowing from these values, and they're also able to attract. This is another interesting thing for me. They're able to attract very good talent, and youngsters are ready to come to this kind of organizations and work for them. Although we can't compete with the other private sector organizations in terms of salaries, etc., they see a lot of meaning and satisfaction in working for this organization. This also has contributed a lot for the success of this organization. There are challenges, multiple challenges: technology, the finances, financial management, more organization development. These are all the challenges. But I'm very happy that this organization is going in the right direction.
I'll ask a more fundamental question for those who are not familiar with how farm organization FPOs work, right? So you have the farmer, you have the FPO organization itself. So you have employees. So, who pays? What is the role of the farmer? If you can just give a broad outline, right?
Okay.
Because there's an inner organization, which is more, more of a governing kind of a body. Then there are the stakeholders of the farmers. So if you can just describe the different stakeholders and what, especially in this given example itself, if you could just use this as a template, then it will kind of help people understand how this whole thing comes together.
Sure. Basically, it is there is a board of directors who are basically picked up from the farming community only, and one or two people from the other fields also have been bought in.
Mhm.
And so it's a fairly well balanced board of directors. And there is a CEO.
Mhm.
A good CEO makes a lot of difference. That the leadership and his commitment,
Mhm.
and then of course there are, at one side we have the farmers who are the shareholders and the owners of this organization. At the same time, they grow various farm produce, and that is one major stakeholder who produces and sells the produce to this particular organization. Of course, on the other side, the employees, they are the stakeholders. And this is very important. We need to educate these employees who are the owners of this organization, how it operates. There must be very clear sharing of the vision, mission, and values of this organization. On the other side, we have customers. They are certainly one of the major stakeholders, and they get the good product, organic product, which is very, very authentic, and they are good. And also, we have another set of stakeholders who are basically, self-help groups. Sometimes it is farmers or other village groups who are creating value-added products and supplying to this, because they get the raw materials around that village only, and they get it and do the value-added products, and through this farmer producer company we market it. They are becoming another stakeholders. Financing institutions, which could be bank, which could be NABARD, and we are also now seriously looking into, we already started that activity, the CSR. The CSR partners play a major role. And in my opinion, a farmer producer company like this, who is always starved for more capital, CSR could be a very good source, and it is for the community development. And many projects and capital investment actually can be taken care by the CSR interventions. We are in interaction with so many organizations in this context. They become in my opinion, they would be one major stakeholders going forward. These are all the stakeholders who, it is a circular model in that sense, and each one has certain interests in this organization. And whatever we achieve here, even if we achieve a very good successful project by a CSR initiative, that organization which has provided this CSR support also gets the benefit. That is that's how the whole this model works. But yes, stitching them together, and it is not a linear business model. It is not just profitability which is important here. And if you are much more conscious about all these dimensions of an activity or a business activity, I think it is moving with that energy. It is moving well successfully.
I'll ask one last question, Pratap ji, on this. So we have multiple models of organizations, right? And society is very used to the typical shareholder entrepreneurial model, where you have a set of people with a certain vision, and then everybody else works for that organization, right? The capitalist model. And you've just described this whole concept where multiple stakeholders with different interests come together, and we've used farmer producer organization as an example as to how it will work. So my question is for the larger society, right? Why should people even care that such a model is needed? Why should we even want such organizations to be created? I'll tell you, I'll qualify that question, because today, and especially this video is going to go on LinkedIn, where there are a lot of our typical corporate employees, right? Everybody looks at industry mostly from the point of view of job creation, creating a job for myself, getting a good package. The company should be there, which is the sector which is growing, right? But I think there's a deeper importance from a society perspective, right? So if you could share your views as to why we also as a society need these kind of models, even though it might be more complex than a typical capitalist entrepreneur kind of a model. Why do we need these models, and what is the benefit? And ultimately, what where does it lead us? Your perspective on this.
See, it should be answered by answering, at least indicating where the other model has led us today.
Yes,
That's
the hidden part of the question. That's the hidden part of the question, right?
So I will not explain that.
No,
Let it be.
Please do explain that.
The other model has not led us anywhere to glory, because that has become too exploitative, and particularly the large bottom of the pyramid has been exploited. Now the employees are getting exploited, the consumers are getting exploited, and it is completely filled with the negativism, and this kind of toxic environment is not good. I think we need to change it. Time has come to change it, and if you don't change it, what will happen? It will collapse. Now there are a lot of doomsayers saying that the whole thing will collapse very soon, but question here is, I think seriously, this world requires alternative models, this or anything else other than what we have been been driving with. So what is this? Exploitation has to be reduced, it has to go. But one simple thing in the food industry today, now whatever we eat in the city, in the urban centers, we don't eat good food. The food has been completely compromised, and this is leading to health challenges. And if you continue to eat, I keep telling this, what you drink is not the milk, it's a white liquid. And what is, even a banana, a banana which we eat is compromised mostly. And even in the name of, some people may say this is organic, but where is the integrity of many of these labels? Now if you have to move to a better life and a better society, it is not just demand and supply, it is also the quality of life. And quality of life will not come just by air conditioners or the highways and buildings. It comes from many other dimensions. How do we ensure better healthcare unless we eat better? Simple thing. Now, yes, the healthcare challenges could be a huge opportunity for capitalistic business models. I agree. But is it the way we want to go? Now, how do we integrate healthcare within the food? No, that's very essential. Unless we integrate, that's what we have always been done. What we are today doing is the disease care. It is not the health care. If you really need to focus on the healthcare, you need to focus on the food. And food has to come properly. Only this kind of organization can ensure that integrity of good food, because it is not driven by those motivations which we are well aware of. So this is, I think, now I would like to, what is the motivation? Is there any choice? There is no choice. And time is up now for, if you continue to do that, it will be much more serious consequences. We need to take a, deep breath and look back. Time has come to relook at the whole models which we are running, calling it as an economy. It is not just the, few people getting rich and large number of people getting exploited. This doesn't work. This pressure, and that's why we are talking about the dharma. Unless we include everybody, unless there is a wholeness, where is dharma? So it is time, and if you don't do it, it is disaster. And I don't think that nature will keep giving us a lot of headroom to keep waiting for that. It is not there. We are already late.
Very true. I totally agree with that view. Shankaran ji, any last thoughts, comments, now that Pratap ji has given a view on how this actually works? It will be good from your perspective also to any last thoughts that you have on how do we actually make this a more robust kind of a model. and from a principal's perspective, right?
Yeah, well, I think Pratapji has touched upon what the problem is.
Yeah.
And also he has indicated what the solutions, where the solutions could lie.
Yeah.
Now, I think there are very, very important institutional lessons to be learned. I thought I will kind of fill that a little bit. We need to actually have different governance systems for which there has to be political will. If we want to give expressions to, farmer producer organizations with their own power, actually, conceptually, what we are saying is the owner and the executors. When I say executors, employees, they can be the same. I mean, so you have 1,500 owners who are themselves taking it upon themselves to manage the affairs. There's no dominant shareholding there. In an FPO, there is no dominant shareholding. Everybody is equal. But those people are willing to step out and do some work for this common thing. They are invited. It's like a good housing society operating. In fact, very interestingly, as I'm talking, I was involved in a housing society, an extremely difficult situation. And we solved the problem by just taking autonomous positions on what is truth, actually. Now, this might sound a little crazy, but actually you can solve a problem by not taking sides. So this whole thing about governance needs to be looked at from a different perspective by political institutions. Now, this is a very difficult thing, but somebody has to start the process, which means that, according to me, things will work if we just simply, if the politician says, for instance, that, okay, I let these guys do themselves things, and I'm interested in self-organization, and I'm interested in them solving the problem themselves, and I'm not going to throw crumbs at them. That's what we see for most of the time, to that, that particular group or whatever, or to everybody. It could be gender-based, it could be social-based, whatever. But if you say, let them self-organize, and I'm willing to listen to them, and I have my support, and let's have a conversation on the principles of justice, principles of fair play, rather than, day one regulations direct. So that's from the political side. From the educational side, a similar commitment to something that is really useful to society has to be there. Today in business education, there is just one course on business ethics, which is actually not useful. Because you're essentially talking about different principles like deontology, and you talk about feminism, you talk about, greatest good for the greatest number. These principles are actually confusing, because at the end of the day, which one do you apply is not answered.
Correct.
So it has to be felt, it has to be deeply lived, it has to be a lived experience. So in the classroom, we have to, as an educator, people have to really, really be practicing governance rather than regulation. I mean, that's a separate subject we can talk about. So political education. Similarly, the professional institutions. And I have looked at this in my research. Professional institutions have to come up with some new stuff, actually. But today, professional educations are basically there. They're doing a good job, with due respect to them, because in terms of implementation, some of our regulatory institutions are fantastic. But that is for regulation. And I have a lot of respect for them. I mean, even in the context of international organizations. But they have to listen and think about change and make, institutions in line with the aspirations of people. Our aspirations have gone up a lot with the internet. We know what's happening. So we need to move ahead, because 300 years ago, a limited liability company and a company as a separate legal person were fantastic ideas. We must not forget it. There's an evolution to it. So currently what we need to do is we have to look at this idea of Dharma or Swadharma and see, how do we make these organizations, whether educational or whether it's regulatory or whether it's professional organization. I'm insisting professional organizations because in India, most education is about catering to the professional conduct. It is not about challenging in a higher conscious level, challenging the variables themselves, so to say. So that's why there is so little respect for research in this country, for instance. Research is about action. It's about creating action for myself and others, which is consistent with my, fundamental impulse of what's right and what is just. And I think we are failing in that. Similarly, so political, then regulatory, educational, and we have trained our farmers. I did a bit of research on this FPO. More than research, actually met a few people. We had a few conferences where I was working, when I was heading a business school. Now, their sense of their own identity is very limited. They're not thinking about being, having to have a unit which is successful themselves, as well as having an industry where it is thriving. It's all about the master and the, I don't want to say slave, that's a very strong word, the leader and the led. Yeah, leader and the led. So regulated and the regulation giver. So regulation for me as an educational institution head would be, or as a professor, would be something given to me. I have no choice, so to say. We are trying to have that kind of conversation. NEP, for instance, got feedback from 3 lakh people, I believe. And they were trying to take that into account. But these have to be actually felt at the bottom level. So students have to, for instance, have to be differently trained. And there are very many ways. All these things have been discussed. There are beautiful ways of doing it. But in our control orientation, we forget. So all these institutions have to be challenged and edged, not overnight changed, but, kind of egged on, or they should be kind of, encouraged to practice self-order, appropriate leadership style, as I said earlier, and empowering people who have the wisdom. As Pratapji rightly said, people have the ability. I also have the same experience with students from, villages. They don't ask, what is there in it for me on day one? If there is a situation, they'll jump into it. After that, they will think, how do I manage the show? It may be simple things like, my friend's sister's wedding, or a situation which is more critical, such as, of course, marriages are critical too, but, like a flood situation. I've seen this happen. They jump into it and start thinking about solution. They don't think about, oh, I'm not an expert, or there is some person who is an expert who can come and do this. So this native wisdom is there, but we have not the mainstream. Take any of these areas, whether it's educational or whether it's governance or any of these areas, we have not tapped into that wisdom, because we are patterning our regulatory conversation about creating discussions about some, best model. We talk about good practices. Good practices have to emerge, not really. So we need to listen to each other much more, and think about a new way to generate these kind of interactions and even regulation. So I guess that is the answer. We should not go by education. We should go by, actually, does it make sense to me? Will it make me happy at the end without sacrificing the happiness of others? Very important. We are governed by things like buyer beware. In the long run, we are dead. So these kind of internal conversation that happens with youngsters who are educated are indeed very, very toxic and destructive. So I've seen this happening as an observer of students from different strata in different organizations in India as well as abroad. I see that happening. And when we enthuse them with these kind of, alternative metaphors, they take to it much more than, seasoned regulators, seasoned academics, seasoned corporate executives. So I think we need to have a different model altogether, which is emerging, no doubt. but I think we can actually make it faster so that there's better chance of survival at all levels, including organizations and people and civilizations.
Thank you, sir. This has been very enlightening for me, right? I think what we've tried to do is explore what is a conscious organization from a normal organization, and then the whole conversation around multi-stakeholder, platform-driven multi-stakeholder organizations, and specifically the case of FPO being an example. It's very clear that society needs this. We do have these kind of models. What we do have are problems because maybe the ecosystem is not ready, as you mentioned. The organizations themselves, there is no expertise, there's no know-how, right? How to start such a company. We have a lot of management principles which have been given to us, but they are all for the traditional setup, right? So there's a lot of how do you create a new organization? That knowledge has been given from a typical capitalist entrepreneur-led organization, but we do not have a how do you create an FPO organization and make it successful, and how do you bring people together? That knowledge itself is not there. And as you said, Shankaranji, right from the institutions that support this to the governance models that they have, to the kind of education that they get, this itself needs a whole different paradigm shift, which currently is no longer being discussed. So I think this is a very great starting point for me to kind of get an understanding on this, and this conversation has been very valuable. I do think maybe we should have more such debates. Maybe take one piece. Like, I'm very interested in exploring, for example, what should a COE look like, right? If we want to bring about change in FPOs, what should a COE look like? What should it do? What should be the boundaries of that versus what the FPO itself does, and what would be their revenue model? What's in it for them? I think that maybe if you are okay, it'll be good to come back and again brainstorm on this. And why should even people be interested in this area, right? I do believe that whatever has been discussed till now, these are all opportunities for entrepreneurship, right? So people who are looking for a new area, we don't always have to create a Swiggy part 2 or Google, Ola part 2. Everybody wants to do, a Me Too. There are real opportunities that exist today in the rural space, which need real solutions and a different out-of-box thinking, where technology and platform can make a difference. For some reason, this part of the world has not been looked at by people with an entrepreneurial spirit. So I'm going to try and see if through this message, we can maybe interest some people to come and explore this space. So thank you for your time. And thank you for the listeners who have listened so patiently to this, to this session, this podcast. And thank you very much.